Greetings, and welcome back to our reading of When Mischief Came to Town by Katrina Nannestad. This is our third video recording, so part 3 of the series, and we are just about to start chapter 2. As you may recall, Inga Maria Jensen has just spent her first night on her grandmother's farm on the island of Bornholm, and she, in this chapter, is going to start her first full day on the farm, and she's going to figure out what the word barbarian means. Her grandmother has told her that she's behaving like a barbarian. What does that mean? Chapter 2, The Bunny, the Book, and the Salty Tears. "Wake up, child," grandmother scolds, pulling the eiderdown back. The freezing morning air turns my skin into lumpy goose flesh. I slip out of bed and grandmother has the sheets flattened and tucked, the eiderdown shaken, the pillows fluffed, and the quilt smoothed perfectly over the top of it all before I have fully opened my eyes. She is standing before me like a black troll, hands on hips, frowning. "Don't just stand there, child. There is work aplenty to be done." I am stripped bare, splashed with cold water, rubbed dry, and dressed in yesterday's clothes. Grandmother pulls 2 large woolen sweaters over my head and wraps a black scarf around my neck 3 times until I almost choke. I'm sure my eyes are bulging. She looks at my lopsided hair, shakes her head in despair, and says, "We'll deal with that later. The animals are waiting." Outside, it is slushy and cold from yesterday's snow, but when grandmother opens the barn door, warm air and sweet animal smells rush at me. There are 2 shiny golden cows called Hilda and Blossom, a brown donkey called Levi, an enormous pig called Plenty, who is suckling 14 pink piglets, hens and geese that don't stand still long enough to be counted accurately, and a turkey called Henry, who is as big as a tea chest. I clomp along behind grandmother, awkward and clumsy in the heavy wooden clogs I have been made to wear. I have never worn clogs before. In Copenhagen, I always wore leather boots, the pretty kind with pointy toes, little heels, and long silk laces. They were light and easy to skip about in. Right now, I feel like I have taken 2 logs, chopped a hole out of the middle of each one, and stepped in. It is true that my feet are warm and dry, but I feel like I might come crashing down at any moment as I thump and limp and stumble across the barn. Grandmother is light and loose in her clogs. I don't know how she does it. I stop by the pig pen and smile at the piglets. "Don't get too excited, child," grandmother warns. "These are farm creatures, not pets. We'll be selling half in the autumn and eating most of the others by Yule time." The donkey is offended. He flattens his ears against his head, pulls his lips back from his teeth, and rolls his eyes, just like grandmother. He begins to bray so loudly and so angrily that grandmother stomps over to see where he is standing and pulls his ear. "You cantankerous old fool, Levi," she shouts. "You'll be the first to go come autumn time." But something about the way she says it and the way Levi swishes his tail and nibbles at her bottom tells me that she doesn't mean a word of it. Grandmother orders me from one end of the barn to the other, feeding, carting, scrubbing, shoveling. I muck out piles of poo so big you could disappear in them, and I almost do when I trip over my clogs and fall headlong into the donkey's stall. Grandmother makes me wash the mess off my face in the bucket of water by the door. I can still feel bits of poo in my ear, but the water is too cold to go splashing it around more than absolutely necessary. By the time grandmother has milked the cows and skimmed the cream off, I am exhausted, and my tummy is rumbling so loudly it would scare elves out of an attic. Grandmother pours 1 bucket of skimmed milk into the trough and commands, "Drink up, Plenty." The pig grunts gently and begins to swill. She is not a disobedient barbarian. I lean over the railing to her pen and whisper, "Good girl. Gobble it all up, and don't forget to say thank you for the lovely meal at the end. You don't want grandmother to slap you." The pig looks up and snuffles her thanks. Breakfast is bread and butter, oatmeal with fresh cream, and hot chocolate. Grandmother puts an extra slurp of cream in my chocolate, but acts as if it is nothing special. I wait for grandmother to say grace. Then I wish the pretty spoon with the flowers on her handle good morning and dive into my oatmeal. It is the best breakfast I have ever eaten, and I think I will have to go back out to the barn, even if it does mean clomping and slipping all the way there and back in those big clogs, and thank the cows for their efforts with the milk, cream, and butter. Grandmother might think I am a naughty child, but I am not. Mamma has brought me up well. The sudden thought of Mamma for the first time this day shocks and brings more pain than any slap could deliver. I put my hot chocolate down and shut my eyes tight. Don't cry, I tell myself, but big salty blobs squeeze their way out, and before I know what is happening, my bread is soggy. It doesn't taste nearly as good as it did 5 minutes ago. A man called Chunky Jorgensen delivers my trunk after breakfast. I smile and say, "Thank you, Herr Jorgensen," but he doesn't even smile back at me. I wonder if I have done something wrong once again. I look to grandmother for guidance, but she is too busy huffing and puffing as she helps guide the trunk through the tiny sitting room into her bedroom. She pays Chunky with 2 jars of marmalade and a dozen eggs for his trouble, then shuts the door behind him. Back in the bedroom, we both stand and stare at the trunk. Grandmother's tiny cottage has a sitting room, a kitchen, and a bedroom. The bedroom has a bed, 2 hooks for grandmother's clothes, and a wooden chair where she sits her teeth and her candle at night. There is no wardrobe, no chest of drawers, no blanket box for all the bits of a child's life that I have just squeezed into her home. 5 things, she snaps. You can choose 5 things to keep out and some warm clothes. The rest must be stored in the barn. She peels the rug off the bedroom floor, takes it outside, hangs it over the clothesline, and starts to beat the dust out. I open the trunk and breathe in deeply. It smells like home. Of Copenhagen, the parlor, my bedroom, the grass from the park across the street, the sweets from Fru Henley's little treat shop, the pigeons at the windowsill, the violets that Mama used to buy every Friday to place on the mantelpiece. But most of all, it smells like Mama. I look at all the treasures inside and think that I cannot possibly decide on only 5. But then I look out the window and see grandmother beating the rug as though it has been very naughty and needs to be given the punishment of its life, and I think that I had better do as she asks. The first thing I grab is my most precious book, Fairy Tales, by Hans Christian Andersen. I cannot live without the ugly duckling, Thumbelina, and the silly emperor, especially not the emperor. Whenever Mama or I felt sad, we would snuggle up together like 2 peas in a pod and read The Emperor's New Clothes. The thought of that silly man walking through his kingdom wearing nothing but his bare bottom always cheered us up. Once, Mama laughed so loudly that Widow Jenkins from upstairs banged on her floor with her walking stick to make us be quiet. Bits of ceiling plaster crumbled and fell on top of us. We thought it was so funny that we laughed even louder, and the widow wouldn't talk to us for 3 weeks afterward. The book goes onto grandmother's bed. Next, I find Frederick the rabbit. He was a gift from Papa. I did not ever know my father. He drowned at sea when his ship sank somewhere between Norway and England when I was only 3 months old, but I am sure he was a kind man. Otherwise, Mama would not have married him. Frederick's nose has been embroidered back on at least 10 times. His left ear is missing, his right leg has been dipped in ink, and he has bare patches from being cuddled and loved so much. I am 10, and too old for cuddly rabbits, really, but Frederick and I have been through a lot together. He will help the nude emperor in cheering me up. I open Mama's enormous dictionary and look up the word barbarian. A barbarian is an uncivilized person, wild and rude. It sounds like a spiteful word. If grandmother is going to call me nasty things, I really don't want to know what they mean. I throw the dictionary back into the trunk and hear a smash. I don't suppose I will be keeping the crystal vase Mama gave me for my 10th birthday either. Finally, I settle on my brush and mirror set. Surely my hair will grow back one day. My sketch pad and crayons and my blue and white quilt, because it still smells of Mama. I look out the window and see Grandmother chopping the head off one of the hens. The body is running around the backyard, blood spurting everywhere, while Grandmother stands by the chopping block, rolling her eyes. The headless hen is acting like a barbarian and wasting her precious time. I lean back into the trunk, take one last breath of my old life, and shut the lid. My eyes start to prickle, so I jump onto the bed with Frederick the Rabbit and Hans Christian Andersen. I flick through the pages until I find The Emperor's New Clothes and begin to read. When we get to the part where the little boy shouts, "He hasn't got anything on! He hasn't got anything on!" Frederick and I laugh so hard that the tears roll down my face, and I am feeling fine until I realize that the tears have been joined by sobs and a dreadful ache in my chest. I can't believe that Mama can feel so real all of a sudden and still be so far away.